I was halfway through waxing down the hull of my old fishing boat when I saw her. Flaming red blazer, clipboard in hand, marching across my gravel driveway like she owned it. Her name was Fellora Ramsey, the HOA president of our neighborhood, and a walking cliché of every power-drunk middle-aged woman you've ever met. "Yorren Zade, we need to talk," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut fiberglass. I leaned on the bow of my boat, still dripping suds. "Morning, Fellora." "What's the emergency?" "Tree leaves fall in the wrong direction again." She didn't laugh. "That boat has to go. It violates Article 7, Section 9, no large recreational vehicles stored on visible property lines. You've been warned." I wiped my hands on a rag and raised an eyebrow. "Warned?" "You dropped a sticky note on my mailbox 3 days ago. That's not a warning, that's litter." Fellora huffed. "The HOA board has already voted. If the boat isn't gone by Friday, we'll fine you $100 per day." I looked at her like she'd just told me to launch it into orbit. "This is my land, Fellora. I've owned it for 15 years. That boat's been here longer than you've lived in this neighborhood." She pursed her lips. "The rules are the rules." I walked over to my garage, ignoring her muttering, and came back with a manila folder. Inside was the original property deed, signed, sealed, and notarized, with a clear clause stating that my plot was exempt from HOA jurisdiction regarding vehicle storage due to a grandfather clause. I held it out. "You might want to read this before threatening fines again." She didn't take it. Just stared at the paper like it was written in ancient Greek. "I'll be reviewing this with the board," she said stiffly. "Do that," I said, "and while you're at it, check the county map. My boundary line ends 4 feet past the driveway." "You don't govern that space." Fellora turned without another word and marched back down the street, heels clicking like angry metronomes. I watched her go, then turned back to my boat. Still had half the hull to finish, and now I had a story to tell my buddies over beer. But something told me Fellora wasn't done yet. 3 days after Fellora's retreat, I noticed a new sign staked just outside my fence line. Whiteboard with red lettering, bold as a billboard. "No storage of boats, trailers, or large vehicles per HOA rules effective immediately." It wasn't even straight. I walked out, coffee mug in hand, inspecting it like it was a snake that wandered onto my land. The thing wasn't just an eyesore, it wasn't even on HOA-controlled property. It was planted 6 inches into the public easement maintained by the city. That's when I spotted the surveillance camera. A small black dome mounted on a rusting pole across the street, aimed directly at my driveway. I could just make out the manufacturer's logo under the lens. Davis, my neighbor 2 houses down, wandered over with his morning paper folded under his arm. He was the kind of guy who'd rather chew nails than get involved in neighborhood drama, but even he looked irritated. "You see that?" he asked, nodding at the sign. "Hard to miss," I said. "Did they put one in front of your place too?" "Not yet. But I saw a white SUV circling last night real slow, same one that almost bumped my mailbox last week. And check this." He unfolded his paper, revealing a printed email slipped between the pages. It was from the HOA board announcing a new emergency rule passed via executive authority due to ongoing compliance concerns. I scanned it. No vote, no community notice, no legal review. "They're trying to manufacture authority," I muttered. "They know they can't enforce it on my lot, so they're pretending urgency gives them power." Davis nodded. "They're bluffing, but they're getting bold." I spent the afternoon filing a report with the city zoning office. They confirmed what I already knew: the easement was public property. The sign had no permit, no authorization. The camera, installed without city approval. Worse, it was wired to a utility pole, an immediate violation of local code. By sundown, I had a city inspector scheduled for the next morning. But Fellora wasn't done. When I returned from work the next evening, there were fresh tire marks across my gravel. Someone had driven up, turned around, and left deep grooves as if they'd spun out. My shed door was slightly ajar. Nothing inside was missing, but the latch had been snapped clean off. That night, I installed 2 motion-triggered floodlights and 4 high-resolution security cameras, one facing the street, 2 covering the yard, and 1 mounted on the boat itself. The system backed up to a private cloud, updated every 5 minutes. If someone came back, I'd have footage. And this time, I wouldn't be the only one watching. The following morning, the city inspector arrived, a young guy named Leon, clipboard in hand, safety vest half-zipped. "Yorren Zade," I nodded and led him to the easement. He pulled out a measuring wheel, checked the coordinates, and shook his head. "This is a classic overreach," he said. "And this camera, wired into a city-maintained pole, that's a violation of Section 32, Subchapter B. I'll file for immediate removal." 3 hours later, a city truck showed up. The workers clipped the wires, hauled the sign out, and taped a notice to Fellera's front door: "Unauthorized equipment on public property. Subject to fine." The next time I saw her, she was pacing on her porch, cell phone pressed tight against her ear, whispering like the world was ending. And still, she didn't come near me. But the silence didn't last long. 2 days later, a registered letter arrived. It was wrapped in a thick white envelope, HOA logo stamped in gold at the top. Inside was a formal notice of violation, again citing the same outdated clause about visible recreational vehicles, this time attached with a photo of my boat, taken at night. The timestamp. Same night my shed was broken into. That photo had been taken by the illegally mounted camera. A camera the city had already removed. I didn't bother calling the HOA. I went straight to my attorney. Her name was Evelyn Cross, a real estate lawyer who'd lived in the area for 20 years. She reviewed the photo, the violation letter, and the timeline of events. Her brow furrowed deeper with every page. "They're manufacturing evidence," she said. "And if they're using surveillance from unpermitted equipment, that's not just invalid, it could be criminal, especially if they trespassed." I handed her a flash drive. The footage from my cameras was time-stamped, clearly showing a white SUV pulling into my driveway at 1:13 a.m., headlights off. A figure stepped out wearing a hoodie and gloves. They didn't take anything, but they reached for the shed door, tugged, then walked off. The license plate was visible for 3 frames. Evelyn froze the video. "That's a board member's vehicle," she said. "I've seen it in prior cases. His name's Conrad Hill, treasurer." I didn't say anything, just watched as she slid the flash drive into her bag. "We're filing an injunction," she said. "You won't hear another word from them for a while," but Evelyn was wrong. That weekend, I hosted a small barbecue. Just a few folks from the block, Davis, the Mendozas, even old Mr. Hart from across the way. We were halfway through grilling when a police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out and approached me calmly. "Mr. Zade, we've received a report of unauthorized surveillance and potential zoning violations. Mind if we take a look around?" I raised an eyebrow. "From who?" They exchanged glances. One finally said, "Anonymous tip." I nodded toward the house. "I've got the city inspector's report, zoning maps, and a lawyer on retainer, but sure, take a look." They did. 10 minutes later, they left with nothing. As they drove off, the taller officer gave me a subtle nod. He knew, they both did, HOA harassment by proxy, but Evelyn had moved fast. By Monday, we had a temporary restraining order filed against the board, preventing them from issuing further violations, accessing my property, or installing any surveillance near my lot. It was signed off by a county judge who'd seen plenty of HOA abuse cases. Then came the hearing. Fellera showed up in a navy blazer, hair pinned back so tight it looked painful. Conrad sat beside her, flipping through a folder of documents that were clearly copies of the same photo they'd already sent me. Evelyn stood calmly, presenting our evidence: the city inspector's statement, footage of the SUV, the time-stamped break-in attempt, and the illegal sign installation. Then came the kicker. "I have here," she said, holding up a printed email. A message sent from Conrad Hill's HOA email account to a private surveillance contractor. instructing them to install a camera without city permits and providing payment from HOA funds. This is not only a misuse of resident dues, it's a felony under municipal code. The courtroom fell silent. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Hill, did you authorize this installation?" Conrad didn't answer. Fellorer reached out to grab his arm. The judge pounded the gavel once. "You're both suspended from acting on behalf of the HOA until further notice, and I'm referring this case to the county prosecutor for review." Outside, news crews were already waiting. Someone had leaked the footage. I didn't stop them. I stood on the courthouse steps, arms crossed, not saying a word. Just watching as Fellera ducked her head and hurried to her car. That night, I got a call from a man named Curtis Randall. Former HOA president, quiet old-timer who'd stepped away years ago when the neighborhood started getting fancy, as he put it. "I've been waiting for someone to pin them down," he said. "You did good, son. It wasn't over. But the tide had turned, the board was fractured, residents were angry. And the boat, still in my driveway, shining under the newly installed motion lights, not a single fine in sight. And for the first time in weeks, I slept with both eyes closed. The morning after the hearing, I found a folded note taped to my back gate. No envelope. No name. Just a single sheet of printer paper, slightly crumpled, with 4 words written in thick black marker. "Back off. Last warning." I stood there reading it, letting the quiet hum of cicadas fill the space where shock should have been. I wasn't surprised, not after what Evelyn had uncovered. Not after the board had been suspended and the story had made the local news cycle. But now it was personal. Whoever left the note didn't just want me to stop fighting, they were threatening me. I walked it straight inside, slid it into a Ziploc bag, and placed a call to Officer Ramirez, the responding officer from the barbecue incident. He recognized my name immediately. "You've got a case file open now, Mr. Zade. I'll swing by this afternoon and log it." By noon, he was on my porch with a digital scanner and a latex glove, taking the note like it was radioactive. He didn't say much, but before he left, he gave me a look that was all business. "Don't let your guard down. These things escalate." The next few days passed quietly, too quietly. No board meetings, no new letters, not even the usual HOA newsletter that always came with a passive-aggressive reminder about grass height or mailbox paint. Then I got a call from Evelyn. "The interim board has scheduled a special session, open to residents. They're planning to audit the HOA's financials." I laughed, short and dry. "Let me guess, Fellora and Conrad didn't exactly keep receipts." She didn't laugh back. "The county DA's office requested the records. They're treating this as a potential embezzlement case now. You might want to be there." The meeting was held in the community recreation hall, a building no one used unless they were forced to. Long, folding tables, plastic chairs, and a smell like old carpet cleaner. I recognized maybe half the faces in the room, most of them people who'd kept their heads down when all this started, when the interim treasurer, a retired CPA named Martha, took the floor. She didn't sugarcoat it. "We've found multiple undocumented expenditures," she said, flipping through a binder thick with statements. "Over $20,000 spent on security enhancements with no approvals, no signatures, and no listed vendors." A man in the back stood up. His name was Brian. Quiet guy, worked nights, kept to himself. "My dues went up last year. They said it was for landscaping." Martha nodded grimly. "The landscaping budget wasn't touched." Another neighbor, Kathy, added, "They took out a reserve fund loan last spring. Said it was for sidewalk repairs. Nothing's been fixed." The room buzzed with voices rising over one another until a sharp knock echoed through the hall. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside, followed by a woman holding a leather briefcase. They didn't wear badges, but they didn't need to. Everyone knew who they were. The woman stepped forward. "I'm Assistant District Attorney Lena Chow. We're here to collect the HOA's financial records and devices used by the former board members during their tenure. If anyone has information, we'll be taking statements after this session." Fellora and Conrad weren't there. Neither was the secretary who usually took minutes, but their absence said more than their presence ever could. Over the next few days, residents began coming out of the woodwork. An elderly couple submitted a sworn statement about being coerced into signing a proxy vote they didn't understand. A single mother revealed that the board had threatened to deny her pool access if she didn't repaint her fence twice in one summer. Evelyn compiled every testimony, every receipt, every blurry photo someone had taken of Conrad's SUV loitering outside properties after dark. Then came the warrant. Conrad Hill was arrested in his driveway, still wearing a golf shirt and slippers. Fellora Ramsey turned herself in later that day after her lawyer negotiated conditions. The charges were serious: misuse of community funds, falsification of records, and trespassing with criminal intent. But the most damning was conspiracy, because the note taped to my gate had been traced back to her printer. The fingerprints on the tape, Conrad's, when I told Evelyn, she didn't flinch. They got sloppy. They thought this neighborhood was theirs to control. The trial was set for late fall. Until then, the HOA was placed under provisional oversight by the county. Martha and 2 other residents formed a temporary board focused on restoring transparency. But trust was thin. Every mailbox carried the weight of skepticism. Every knock on a door brought a moment of hesitation. I kept my cameras up, rewired the floodlights with a backup battery, and I didn't remove the boat not out of spite, but because it was mine, and I had every right to keep it there. One afternoon, Davis dropped by carrying a clipboard and a 6-pack of local brew. "Petition to dissolve the HOA," he said. "We need 70% of homeowners. We're at 52. Thought maybe you'd want to help close the gap." I took the clipboard, flipped through the signatures. People who'd once kept their heads down now standing up. "Count me in," I said. Let's finish what they started. Over the next 2 weeks, we canvassed door to door. People were more receptive than I expected. Some were still wary, unsure of what self-governance would mean. But most were just tired of the fear, the fines, the silent resentment that had festered like mold behind drywall. By the end of the month, we had 74%. The final vote was held in the same recreation hall, this time packed to the walls. When the motion passed, there were no cheers, just a long, collective exhale. Like the neighborhood had been holding its breath for years and finally let it go. The HOA was officially dissolved. A few weeks later, I received a letter from the county clerk's office. My property file had been updated. A note added to the deed indicating exemption from any future residential association encroachments without my express consent. Permanent, binding, and notarized, I framed it. I kept the boat. Not because I needed it every day, but because it had become something else, a symbol of standing ground, of not folding when the bullies circled. Fellora and Conrad pled guilty to lesser charges in exchange for restitution and probation. They weren't seen in the neighborhood again. The house Fellora once obsessed over was sold at auction. The new owner didn't bother repainting the shutters she used to complain about. One evening, I walked past my boat and noticed something wedged in the trailer hitch. It was a note, but this time on lined paper, in neat handwriting. "Thanks for standing up. We're better for it." No name. Just that. I left it where I found it. Let the wind carry it when it was ready. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to the people who lived in it, not the ones who tried to rule it. 3 months after the neighborhood voted to dissolve the HOA, the rhythm of daily life had finally settled into something that felt real again. The lawns weren't all perfectly trimmed anymore, but the air felt lighter. The tension that used to hang between hedges and sidewalks had thinned like fog burning off in the sun. I was repainting the shed one Saturday, the same one they'd tried to break into, when I noticed a white van parked across the street. No logos. No plates, just idling there, engine low and steady. I kept painting, eyes flicking back every so often. After 15 minutes, it drove off. Later that afternoon, I spotted the same van 2 blocks down, parked behind a row of hedges near the community tennis courts. This time, I jotted down the VIN etched on the windshield base. I wasn't paranoid by nature, but after what I'd lived through, I didn't write anything off anymore. The following Monday, I brought the number to Evelyn. She ran it through a contact in her network. When she called me back, her voice was sharper than I'd heard it in weeks. That van's leased through a shell company connected to a private contracting firm out of state, same firm that handled the illegal surveillance equipment before. I didn't say anything at first, just listened to the hum of her fan on the other end of the call. "They're still watching someone," she added, "and I don't think it's just you." 2 days later, Martha came by, papers in hand and worry in her eyes. She'd been digging through records from the old HOA office, trying to reconcile old expenditures for the county audit. One file folder had been mislabeled and stuffed in a box of pool maintenance receipts. Inside were copies of personal checks, residence checks made out to an account that had never been disclosed. "They were laundering dues," she said, handing me copies. "A private account under a fake community improvement committee. But look at the endorsements." Each check had been signed over to a third party, someone named Ellis Brandt. The name didn't ring a bell. I scanned the documents again, then cross-checked the address. It wasn't local. It wasn't even in the state. Why would a fake committee be sending money to someone in New Mexico? That night, I logged into the county's property records system and searched every parcel in the neighborhood for liens, transfers, or encumbrances. I found something I hadn't expected. 9 properties, including 3 belonging to elderly residents, had quietly transferred partial ownership percentages to an LLC registered under that same Ellis Brandt. The transfers had been notarized with forged signatures. I knew 2 of the homeowners personally. One had suffered a stroke the year prior and barely left his home. The other, a retired schoolteacher, had no family and rarely checked her mail. There was no way they'd willingly signed over anything. The next morning, I brought everything to Officer Ramirez. He took one look at the forged documents and excused himself for 10 minutes. When he came back, he had 2 other officers with him and asked me to walk them through the timeline from the beginning. By the end of the day, a financial crimes task force was on the case. The investigation widened fast. They traced the LLC through a daisy chain of holding companies, eventually landing on a P.O. box in Santa Fe. From there, it unraveled quickly. Fellera and Conrad hadn't just been misusing HOA funds, they'd been coercing and deceiving vulnerable homeowners into signing property transfer forms under the guise of special assessments and tax lien protections. In reality, they were funneling ownership stakes to Brandt, a former real estate developer who'd been banned from practicing in 3 states. With enough fractional ownership, the plan had been to force sales and quietly flip the houses for profit. When the HOA dissolved, Evelyn explained during a late-night call, they lost the legal infrastructure to cover their tracks. That's why the van came back. They're trying to figure out what was left behind. The DA's office issued indictments within 2 weeks. Conrad was picked up in Florida trying to board a charter flight under a fake name. Fellera had already skipped town, but she was found days later, hiding at a cousin's ranch in Utah. Ellis Brandt was arrested in New Mexico after federal agents intercepted him on his way to a private airstrip. At the press conference, the district attorney laid it out clearly. This was a calculated effort to exploit a position of trust within a residential HOA system. The defendants systematically targeted elderly and isolated homeowners, forging documents and laundering funds through fraudulent entities. They will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The trial drew reporters from 3 states. It wasn't every day that a suburban HOA scandal turned into a multi-state real estate fraud case. Witnesses testified: Martha, the elderly homeowners, even a former notary who admitted to being paid off to look the other way. I took the stand, too, with Evelyn beside me. We submitted the footage, the forged documents, the financial trails. It all stuck. Fellera and Conrad were each sentenced to 14 years without parole. Brant got 17. Restitution was ordered, and a court-appointed trustee was assigned to return the fraudulently transferred property shares to the rightful owners. With the case closed and the neighborhood finally free of its rot, we turned to rebuilding not just properties, but trust. The old recreation hall became a true community space. We installed a shared tool library. Davis led a few workshops on basic home repair. One of the teenagers down the block started a weekend garden club. Without the HOA's grip, the place didn't fall apart, it came alive. One evening, I was finishing up patching a section of fence when I heard footsteps behind me. It was the retired schoolteacher whose name had appeared in the forged transfers. She looked different, lighter somehow. "They told me you helped stop it," she said quietly. "I didn't even know they'd tried to take my house." I set down my hammer. "You shouldn't have had to find out that way." She nodded, then handed me a small, folded envelope. Inside was a photograph of my boat, sitting in the driveway, sunlight glinting off the hull. Written on the back, symbol of a win. I didn't frame it. I pinned it inside the shed, right above the workbench. The boat stayed, not as a statement anymore, but as part of the home. It got a new coat of paint and a name stenciled in crisp letters across the stern. Due process. And every time I looked at it, I remembered what it took to keep it there, not just a deed, not just a lawyer, but a community that decided enough was enough. What they'd tried to do wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. And this time, they didn't walk away with silence, they walked away in cuffs.